TimeEnds Radio.
All right, we're live. Timothy,
Yes, Maximus.
how are you?
I'm doing good. How are you, my friend?
Good. This is excited. Yeah. So, update us on how life has been so far. It's been what, like maybe a month and a half since we last spoke?
Yeah, something like that. What did we do? End of January, something like that?
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, a month and a half, couple months. Life moves forward as it does. As we mentioned off camera, life's standard trials and tribulations. Everybody has them. I have them too. Challenges with work and things like that. We've been busy as heck.
Oh, really?
At work. Oh my God. Yeah. You can imagine. Everybody got their stimulus check and now they want to spend it. So.
Oh yeah, I bet.
So we've been having some record-setting days for a couple of weeks now.
Okay. Well, I'm going to jump into the last thing we talked about.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
So there was a question that was brought up, and it was more on the science behind the evidence of the pictures and the paintings and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
The question was, how do you know scientifically how accurate that those paintings are? Like they're talking about like the dinner scene and the nativity scene, like the original paintings that everyone's seen.
Okay, so you mean the artwork that exists
Yes.
today that has been painted or whatever over the centuries about either the nativity or frankly the resurrection. We're close to the resurrection, and we may talk about that a little bit today, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's their question. They're just curious about how accurate those are, knowing that we're now they met someone like you that is correcting history.
Right. Okay. Well, there's a lot of comments you can make about the artwork that does exist. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Because, some of it is better than others. Okay. Also there, of course, they were basing it on what they knew at the time.
Mm-hmm.
So there's that component, what people knew at the time. Also, we're getting to the very heart of my work very quickly, which is that we are contrasting the tradition with what we are now finding out to be historically accurate. And that's one of the key components of this whole discussion, is that, when does tradition become an end unto itself and kind of take over, right?
Right.
Because if and I'll just go there. Let's just go there right now. The Bible commands God's people to commemorate certain events, right? Mm-hmm. So, for example, in the Old Testament, you have God commanding the Jews, the Israelites, to commemorate the Passover, right? And then when Jesus comes, what we call the Last Supper would rightfully be called the Last Passover. Okay, because that's what he and his disciples were celebrating, was the Passover supper, in light of he now knew at that point in time, he knew he was facing his death, right? And then in the New Testament, we are commanded to partake of the Lord's Supper, okay, to commemorate that event. So things like rituals and traditions, they are there in the Bible. There's no question about that. But the flip side is you also have Jesus just ripping the Pharisees apart and telling them, but wait a second, your traditions do not honor me. Your traditions have become an end unto themselves and are breaking the very commandments that you think you're keeping. So there comes this point where, because here it is, when you allow error to creep in, right, uncorrected, and then that error grows and grows and grows and grows, and then when the attitude sets in of, well, this is our tradition, so we're going to do it this way, and then the tradition becomes what's important, not the truth, you've crossed a line, right? Now it
Yeah.
may be difficult to tell exactly where that line is. That I'm absolutely admitting that this can be a long, slow, incremental journey from truth to error, and that you don't know where you crossed the line. But that's exactly what I'm addressing with both the nativity, and like I said, today we'll probably talk about the resurrection a little bit as well. And that is, man, truth matters. I mean, we need to rescue truth from familiarity, you know?
Yeah. And a follow up to that, we talked about how some people are just like, no, I'm gonna follow what I've always followed because
Sure. Yep.
right
Mm-hmm.
now the question is, you mentioned that like you couldn't sing certain carols because you wholeheartedly know that it's not it's
Right.
not
It'll drive me
accurate, right?
crazy. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not in a sense of convincing people because we know that's tough. But like, if we're educating people, what would be a better approach so that they don't feel that they need to swallow a pill that they're not. You know what I mean?
Right.
Like they're so used to the tradition, and you're like,
Sure.
it's fine, but
Right. Well, I mean, you came very close to saying what I would say next, which would be, I have very little interest in convincing people against their will.
Right.
That's not what I'm about. And number one, we know it doesn't work, right?
Right.
There's that old little quip, that little saying, a man convinced against his will is of the same opinion still. I have no desire to convince people against their will. I want to have conversations with people who have questions, whether we agree a little or a lot, right? If you want to have a conversation, I'm open. So I actually enjoy having conversations with skeptics, as long as it's a conversation. Okay.
Right.
Because like I said, I have no interest in convincing someone against their will. So if they're that skeptical that they're not going to, and it's not that they have to believe what I say. That isn't it. That isn't it either. You don't have to believe me, and that isn't what this is about either. But if we're not having a conversation where there's intellectual honesty and we're trading ideas and listening to each other, it's like, okay, well, that's pointless. I don't need to convince you. I know you're not going to convince me. So, so that's where that is. But, back to your artwork question,
Mm-hmm.
there's some of it that is okay. And then there's a lot of it that's garbage. And frankly, it's because it's based on what they knew. And if they knew what they knew was incorrect, then you're kind of stuck, right? And I haven't gone there in depth lately, but I have done a little bit of it on my website, where I will take a work of art and that's about the nativity, and I will research who the artist was and when he did it and things like that, and then point out, okay, well, this is what we know is correct and this is what we know is incorrect and stuff like that. So like a couple of quick examples is you can go to my website and you can see it. It's one of my earliest posts, and I don't have the artist's name memorized, but he painted a couple of pictures about Bethlehem in winter, right?
Okay.
With the nativity. Well, now we know that it wasn't in winter, right?
Yeah.
And then not only is it winter in his painting, but it looks like a European village in winter. He didn't adjust for the fact that, the latitude of Jerusalem is the same latitude as Ensenada. Okay, so it's or El Paso.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
It's not a northern location. It's pretty southern, right? And it's on the Mediterranean. That's very, very temperate. It's not quite tropical necessarily, although in some parts of Israel it probably is. But so winter in Jerusalem means rain. It does snow, okay, or Bethlehem rather. It does snow occasionally. It does happen, and people, remark that. They go, "Oh, look at this! It snowed in Bethlehem," because it can happen, but it's really pretty unusual. So there's one quick example of winter in Bethlehem. Okay, great, right? No, it wasn't winter, so we know it didn't look like this, And then I can't remember if I posted it on my website. I know I posted it on my Facebook page. I came across a work of art which showed now it's frequently in classical terminology, it's known as the adoration of the Magi, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it's when the Magi showed up, and there are lots and lots and lots of depictions of the adoration of the Magi. As a matter of fact, one of the factoids I tripped over is that there's more artwork that is the adoration of the Magi than there is just of the baby Jesus, right? Or even the baby Jesus with Mary or with Joseph. But when you add in the Magi, now all of a sudden there is a ton of artwork about the adoration of the Magi. And like I said, I posted it on my Facebook page.
Did you post it on your personal one or God Save the King?
No, on the God Save the King page.
Okay, that's why I'm
right.
trying to find it.
I do not. I have several different Facebook pages.
Yeah, right.
And therefore, and so, God Save the King is on the God Save the King Facebook page.
Okay.
And so if I say I posted it, that's what I'm talking about, right?
Got it. Okay.
So you'll probably find it by scrolling down there that there's a picture of the infant Jesus with the Magi, not the baby Jesus, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so whoever did this work of art made the very correct assertion that by the time the Magi showed up, Jesus was about 15 months old.
The one where you said this representation is somewhat helpful because Jesus was indeed a toddler.
Correct. That's the one.
That was one of my questions too. Is there any paintings or not pictures, but paintings of him, teenager and growing up and stuff?
Right. Well, see, and that's what you and I were talking about off camera. Is that my ultimate goal for God Save the King is not only to retell the story of the Nativity and tell it accurately, but I need to produce the visuals.
Right.
That's the challenge. Is that because all the visuals we have are wrong, that means we don't have any that are correct. I can't go to the internet and quickly look up pictures of the Magi or pictures of the infant Jesus or pictures of the baby Jesus and find the ones that look the way I know they looked, because the tradition took over so extensively that every visual we have, right, looks like the tradition,
Yeah, and see,
So
and to go back to that question, that's what I like about you, is that you're not following like some individuals will try and cram their beliefs and thoughts and all that down your throat. But with you, it's education and conversation, whether people accept it or not. And just for the individual that asked that question, everything he's saying now, he's saying like it's evidence and stuff, but it's what we're trying to correct, and so that's kind of like what he's going off of, is that it's all about the conversations. And I like that a lot because you get more out of conversations than
debates. Yeah, I mean,
exactly.
I've been asked to debate people, and I generally refuse, because it's like I don't want to. I have no interest in arguing with someone, because at the end, who's convinced?
Right.
And I mean, maybe you might reach some people in the audience, and maybe you might convince some of them. But why do I want to go toe to toe with someone who doesn't believe them and sit here and beat each other up over what you believe and what I believe? It's to me, that's a waste of my time. But I enjoy, like I said, repeating myself, I enjoy conversations, and as a teacher, and this as a music teacher, that moment that a student gets the aha moment, that's what it's all about as a student. So whether it's like we talked about last time, whether I'm teaching music, whether I'm teaching martial arts, whether I'm teaching the Bible, when the light bulb comes on, and the person listening to you goes, "Oh my God, I never thought about it that way.
Yep.
That's amazing."
Yep.
That's what we live for,
Yeah, so it's awesome. Yeah, yeah. I mean, you said it, and that's why I like this a lot, because your approach with this is really, you know, in all honesty, there's no arguing. They're just like the questions like they have is just
Yeah.
generic, and it's understandable. Like just, and the painting thing was interesting to me when they said, how do we know those are the accurate paintings? But like you said, you would research who did it, and you
Right.
know,
And sadly, because most of them are based on the tradition, most of them need some correction, right?
you
Because
mean the paintings are based on tradition? You said.
yeah, because
Oh,
well, here let's do this. Let's play a little game here.
okay.
So the traditional nativity story,
Right.
right? Mary and Joseph are they're newlyweds, right? But
Hmm.
she's already pregnant. They need to travel to Bethlehem from their home in Nazareth because of this. Now, in the Bible, it's depending upon which English version you read, it's either called a taxation
Hmm.
or a census or a registration. And it's a registration. It wasn't a taxation, and it wasn't technically a census. It was a registration of kinds. And we can talk more about that in a minute. But that was what caused them to have to travel
Hmm.
to Bethlehem, which is, we know for certain that it is Joseph's ancestral hometown. And most likely it is also Mary's ancestral hometown. It's just that for her, that's not mentioned specifically. For him, it is. It's that we know it's his ancestral hometown. So they have to go there to register because they are, the way the Bible says it, is because they are of the house and lineage of David. They are royalty.
Right. I remember.
They're from the royal family. So let's go there for a sec. So the registration, it coincided with a great honor that was being bestowed upon Augustus Caesar. Okay. He was being given the title Father of the Country by the Roman Senate. Okay. And
Hmm.
that's a huge, great big deal. And what it required an oath of allegiance that was empire wide. Okay. So therefore so whether it was in Roman provinces or Roman client kingdoms, because Judea was a Roman client kingdom at the time, not a province. It
Hmm.
was a client kingdom run by Herod the Great, but it would have required this oath of allegiance from every notable person. So the royal family in Judea, that would have been notable persons. So
Right.
that's why Joseph and Mary, and it says very clearly that Mary had to go with Joseph to register together,
Right.
right?
Yeah.
When you look at it in the Aramaic version, that's extremely clear that they were both required to go. So they had so getting back on track to the traditional story,
Hmm.
right? They had to travel from Nazareth to Bethlehem, and then we read that when they arrived in Bethlehem, and this is fun because this is the amazing stuff that I've uncovered. It says that when they arrived in Bethlehem, in the traditional story, they go to the local motel, and the way we tell it, we speculate, we say, well, the town was overcrowded due to the registration, and therefore there was no room in the local motel. So they stayed. So the innkeeper offers them to stay in the stable that's behind the inn, and that's where Jesus is delivered. And then the shepherds show up, and then the magi show up, and then you have your manger scene with the shepherds on one side and the magi on the other,
Right.
and all this stuff,
That's
right?
tradition.
But
That's
but the tradition is travel to Bethlehem, no room in the motel.
Hmm.
They go to the stable, they give birth, the shepherds arrive, the magi arrived. Okay. Now we've already talked about the fact that, sorry, magi didn't arrive until 15 months later.
Right.
Okay.
Right. Right.
Because in the scripture it very clearly says that the shepherds found a baby in a manger. The magi found a young child in a house.
Right.
And those are not the same thing. Okay. They're just
Right.
not. Now, and then also, and see, now it's understandable how the tradition came about. It's actually very understandable because when you read that she laid him in a manger because there was no room in the inn, the motel, right?
Mm-hmm.
You think to yourself, well, what is a manger? Well, a manger is a feeding trough for animals. Okay, well, where do you find a feeding trough? Well, you find a feeding trough in a stall for cattle or sheep or something like that. And well, where do you find that kind of stall except in a stable? Okay, so it's completely understandable why we went there. But what we didn't do is we didn't actually do really good investigative research on what Judean life and architecture would have looked like.
Right, like you mentioned, the inn is a guest room.
Is guest room, right?
Yeah,
because what I've discovered is that, well, number one, if you were standard Judean, person, number one, you were taxed to death by Herod, so you didn't have a lot of money, right?
Mhm.
And while you may have had some household animals, they didn't use stables as a regular practice. Not for the commoners, not for the commoners or the poor. Now, if you were rich, you might have a stable for your animals, but if you were a commoner, you didn't have a stable for your household animals. You had a cow and a few sheep or goats or something like that. But what you did is you kept them in the house, right?
Yeah.
And at night you would, or pardon me, in the daytime, you'd take them outside and put them in a pen, or stable or tether them outside. But then at night you brought them into the house. So the manger they're referring to is in the house, right? And then,
Yeah.
like you've already indicated, and we talked about this last time, that the guest room was at one end of the house. This makeshift area for the animals was at the other end of the house, but then the manger was right there. The manger was in the living room. So now we understand that, and like we said, the Greek word for inn is not the word for a commercial inn, right?
Yeah.
It's the Greek word for a guest room, right? And so the Greek words there is for guest room is kataluma, and then the Greek word for a commercial inn would be a pandokion, right? And see, I picked up on this fact, a lot. This was incremental. This took me years and was incremental figuring this out because like I said, if the tradition is true, okay, it's understandable how we got there. Oh, there was no room in the inn. There was no room in the motel. Okay, well, that means there was no vacancy. That means the innkeeper turned him away. Okay,
Yeah.
so we artificially supply the innkeeper, even though no innkeeper is mentioned in the record.
Yeah, so a play on words because they took it literally.
Correct, right?
Yeah.
Well, that's because now somebody mistranslated kataluma, right?
Right.
Because what's really cool, this is something that's really cool about the Bible in general and about the Gospel of Luke in particular, is that Luke uses both the word kataluma and the word pandokion in other areas of his gospel.
Mhm.
And most people, even whether they're trying to or not, we use our language consistently, right?
Yeah.
And Luke was a historian, so therefore, unless he was a crank, he used his language very, very consistently. So there's, and this is cool because it ties us into this time of year, the Passover, right? When the final Passover was approaching, Jesus instructed his disciples to go into Jerusalem where they would meet a man who would show them a furnished room where they would be able to celebrate the Passover. And that's the word kataluma. It's a guest room in the man's house.
Right.
So why is it correctly translated guest room in that record, but incorrectly translated inn or motel, right? In the other record? Someone messed up. Okay.
Do you think it's because they're describing the manger and all that? That's why it was kind of messed up?
Well, yeah, like I said, once again, if you key off of the word manger
Right.
and you aren't aware that the manger is actually in the living room,
Yeah.
right, then the line of thought, the line of logic does make sense. Well, where's a manger? Well, what is a manger? A manger is an animal trough. Well, where's an animal trough? An animal trough is in a stall. Well, where's a stall? A stall is in a stable. Okay, the conjecture makes sense, but it just turns out that's exactly what it was. It was conjecture, and we just went down a rabbit trail in the wrong direction for several thousand years.
Yeah, but you'd figured that they would, like a linguist would be like, that word doesn't mean two different things,
Right. Well, that's what happened. Me and others like me went, wait a second, time out. Did anybody check?
Yeah.
Right. So just to finish the statement here. So in contrast, you have the record of the Good Samaritan, right?
Mm-hmm.
So in the story of the Good Samaritan, this man gets hurt, the man gets wounded, and he gets passed by. The priest pass him by, the Levites pass him by, but then the Samaritan helps this wounded man. And it says that he takes him to an inn, right? Mm-hmm. And pays the innkeeper to take care of him. And so that is clearly a commercial inn, and that's the word Pondokian. Right. So we have this beautiful contrast all in the Gospel of Luke of the word kataluma and the word Pondokian. So now we know that the kataluma is the guest room in a private home.
Yeah, that's just funny how they translated it and just took it literally because of one description. Yep. That's where.
And that's all it takes. That's all it takes. And last time did we talk about the proto-evangelium of James? Does that ring a bell?
I'm not sure, to be honest with you.
So the proto-evangelium of James is what is known as an apocryphal or a pseudepigraphal work, right? Mm. It's extra biblical. It's not part of the Bible. It was written about 200 years after the bulk of the scripture was already written down, right? Mm-hmm. Now, it's attributed to James, the brother of Jesus. Mm-hmm. That's why it's called pseudepigraphal, because it is falsely attributed to James. Anybody with a brain knows that it wasn't James who actually wrote it. And yet at the end of the manuscript, it says, James, the brother of the Lord, writing from Jerusalem, blah, 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 blah. Okay. Well, we know that's not true. So it's somebody made it up, okay, and wanted to make it look like it was inspired the same way we talk about the scriptures being inspired. And unfortunately, there was a lot of this. There was a lot of this going on. A lot of these apocryphal works, these pseudepigraphal works, they were people that were writing stuff down and they knew it wasn't true and they did it anyway because they wanted to look cool, right?
Right.
So the Proto-Evangelium of James is one of these books or articles, right? It's not very long. It's only, what is it? I forget off the top of my head, but it's only 25 or 30, I think, paragraphs long. It's not super long. Mm-hmm. But this is the singular source, not singular, that's not the right word to say. It's one of the most exclusive sources of the traditional story that we have. Okay.
Yeah. We did talk about this last time. Because you threw so many titles out, I couldn't memorize it.
Right,
I remember.
Well, I mean, if you're not familiar with this stuff, I'm using a lot of big words and stuff like that. But yeah, in the Proto-Evangelium of James, this is where we get Mary on a donkey. Yeah. This is where we get Mary born in a stable or in a cave. Those are in here and things like that. This is where we get Mary giving birth the same night they arrived. Which all these things are nonsense. Where did this stuff come from? Well, this is where it came from. It came from this document that is just so riddled with error, right? Mm. One of the things I write about in my work is the fact that when you critically examine this piece of work, it is ridiculously evident that whoever it was who did write this had never been to the Bible lands.
Yeah.
Because they had, or I shouldn't say they'd never been there, but they either had never been there or because they're writing about it like they had.
Right.
Okay. So they either had never been there or they just didn't know very much about it because their geographic descriptions are incorrect. Their descriptions of Jewish life and Jewish practices is incorrect. They describe things that never would have happened. It's not possible. And
Mm.
yet we have accepted this as an alternative to the biblical records that we know are true. And so this is where the tradition came from, and it just ran amok. So likewise, getting back to our previous conversations, this is why we think it was in a stable, right?
Yeah.
Which, like we've said, makes a certain degree of logic if you're keying off of the word manger, right? Because
Yeah.
if that's a feeding trough, once again, well, where do you find a feeding trough? In a stall, in a stable, et cetera, right?
Yeah.
So it does, and likewise, therefore, now the artwork makes sense, right? Because
Yeah.
for hundreds of years, right, and especially once you jump forward to, I forget the exact date off the top of my head, but it's about 1,000 years. So it was like 11th century, 12th century. I don't have it memorized because there's just so much information. You have the first ever living nativity scene being done by St. Francis of Assisi, right?
Yeah.
So he keyed off of the traditions that he was familiar with, and he got some live animals and some straw, and he did it in a cave, and he did this, living nativity scene, right? Based upon what he knew. But what he knew was incorrect. But then that became so popular. See, and history records that once he did that, that nativity scenes became so popular that it only took about 100 years, and you could find it anywhere in Europe.
Right.
When he had done it once, in Italy, right? And then it took off, flash in the pan, and the next thing you know, it's all over Italy that you can find these living nativity scenes. But now we're finding out that, yep, I'm really sorry, folks, it didn't really look like that. But all the way back now to your original question is, yeah, most of the artwork is incorrect because the artwork is based on the tradition. So it shows Mary and Joseph and the baby Jesus in an animal stall, which wouldn't have been the case, right?
Right.
And surrounded not only by, of course, the shepherds brought a couple extra sheep with them, right? Which, that's kind of questionable. If you're the shepherds in the field and the angels appear to you and say, the Messiah is born, and you decide to go try to find him, are you going to haul a couple of sheep with you?
No.
It's like, no, I'm good. Let's go, Max. Let's go. We've been given the sign. Let's go find the baby Jesus. So we don't take sheep with us, right? And then now the irony is, now here's the irony, right? Now that we do understand what traditional Judean architecture would have looked like, there may have been animals right there. Okay.
Right. I remember. Yeah.
Right. It's possible. Now, we don't know for sure because if there's a baby being born, the smart thing to do is to move the animals out of the house.
Of course. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So while it's possible, yeah, I think it's far more because if you're talking about a very typical labor for a first child, right? And we do know that Jesus was born in the early evening. That we do know, okay? Yeah. Because the whole ritual of the swaddling clothes, right? Because that was the sign the shepherds were given. The shepherds were told, you will find a baby wrapped in swaddling clothes and lying in a manger, okay? Swaddling clothes was a ritual. So here we are back to the ritual thing again. But what they would do is the baby would be born. They would wash the baby in salt water, and then they would wrap it like a mummy in these swaddling clothes, these strips of cloth, and then they would pray over and dedicate the child. And then they would take the swaddling clothes off. You didn't leave them on the baby for an extended amount of time. They were on the baby for 10, 15 minutes.
Right.
That's it, right? Max. So look at the impeccable timing of the word of God. The shepherds are given this sign, you will find a baby wrapped in swaddling clothes. Okay. Well, that tells us They found the baby probably within an hour of it being born, because the baby would have been delivered. They would have washed it. They would have wrapped it in swaddling clothes, and said their prayers and dedicated the child to God and everything. And then get those swaddling clothes off it, and just wrap it in a cloth, a blanket, or whatever, right? And still put it back in the manger because it made a perfect makeshift bed. But
Right.
but there you go. So but yeah, they wouldn't have brought extra sheep with them. That's kind of ridiculous. But this is all in a standard Judean home.
Wow.
That's where it was. It wasn't in a stable. It was in a very standard Judean home. Oh, and so we were back to the notion of if it was standard labor, right?
Yeah.
So and I'm not a woman. I've never been pregnant, and also I don't have kids. So I'm not speaking this from experience. I'm speaking this from basic knowledge of childbirth, right?
Yeah.
That maybe 16, 20 hours, of labor.
Yeah.
So therefore, if he was born at, let's just say 7 p.m., right?
Right.
If he was born at 7 p.m., then that means she went into labor at 1 or 2 in the morning, the previous morning.
It's possible.
Right.
Yeah.
Guesstimate, a guesstimation, that's pretty good. Right. So, so if she's in labor, the point of all this being, so she's in labor, and there's probably, this is either very close friends or family that they're staying with us. And I'll talk more about that in a minute. But yeah, we know what would have happened. They would have told all the men to get out of the house and take the animals with you. And then we're going to go find the midwife and go boil some water. And now we're going to have a kid.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's exactly what would have happened. That's exactly what would have happened in any agricultural community throughout the world, for that period of time. That's how it would have gone down.
But they don't really show that. I mean, like me growing up learning about this stuff, like I didn't know any of that.
No, See, now I wouldn't, growing up, I didn't learn any of that either. But now, as adults and as researchers, we go, oh yeah, real life here. Yeah. Real life happens. Childbirth is messy. It's painful.
Yeah.
She would have had contractions. No, she didn't deliver the same night they arrived. 16, 20 hours of labor at least. Maybe more. Maybe less. It's hard. You never know exactly. But yeah, did she start having contractions in the middle of the night, the day before? And then, like I said, you get up in the morning, and it's like, because I think they were with extended family. Right.
You mentioned that.
Right. So now, okay, well, get the men out of the house, find the midwife, get the animals out of here, build a fire, boil some water, get some rags, and we're going to have a kid sometime today, and there it is. And that's real life right in your face. So,
yeah, that's why I always question the traveling, because I mean, common sense here, this has nothing to do with anything, but common sense. If a woman is carrying and there's a certain time frame where you can't travel.
Yeah, right. See,
and
now this is interesting because when I first started working on this, right, and this is, God Save the King is a 30-year project for me.
Right.
That was one of the earlier errors that I went, okay, wait a second. They've got her delivering the same night they arrive. That's insane.
It is.
Okay, that number one, labor doesn't go that fast. Right. Mm-hmm. Or number two, it means she was in labor on the back of the donkey. And that's really ridiculous. Right.
Right.
That's just beyond unfathomable. Right. So that was one of the things in my mind. It was one of the first things, like, nope, didn't happen that way. Sorry. Didn't go down like that. Right. Yep. So then I started calculating, okay, well, how far, because if she didn't give birth the night they arrived, right, which is, full term pregnancy, 9 months. Well, when could she have traveled like that? Right.
Yeah.
At 8 months, maybe at 7 months, maybe. So you start working backwards incrementally and going, when would that had been possible? Right.
Yeah.
Because this wouldn't have been the first time a pregnant woman had to travel.
Yeah. Right.
Right. That's not, and this isn't the first time a pregnant woman would have had to have traveled at that day and time. Okay. So but so I of course did extensive research into modes of travel, in ancient Judea. Well, the most common mode of travel was called walking, you know,
Yeah.
and so and we now know that they this was a pilgrimage culture, right? That
Right.
they
Right.
had these feasts that they had to go, that the males had to go to 3 times a year. And okay, well, Nazareth is 80 to 90 miles from Jerusalem or Bethlehem, so you walk. you know an
How long did?
average adult can cover 20 miles in a day, so you take 4 or 5 days and you walk it you
Yeah,
know
that's what I was about to ask you. So
Mhm.
I mean, the time traveled. I mean, you got to remember, when a woman's carrying, her back's gonna go from all that
Oh,
walking.
good Lord, yes. Yeah. And
Yeah.
see, and that even influenced me trying to speculate which route they took,
All
right?
right. Right. Yeah.
Because over time, we have said, well, they probably traveled this way. Well, no, they might have traveled this way. So they might have taken the Jordan Valley Road, or they might have taken the King's Highway, or they might have taken what's it? What do they call it? The Way of the Patriarchs, right?
Hmm.
Because there is a road that goes from northern Israel to southern Israel that is known as the Way of the Patriarchs, because there are several records in the Bible with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob traveling that exact same road. So hence it's called the Way of the Patriarchs, right? But the problem with the Way of the Patriarchs, it's also known as the Ridge Road, because it traversed the ridge line of the Judean and Samarian mountains, right? So
Hmm.
you're talking about a road that's up, down, turns, right?
Yeah.
So part of what that convinced me was, well, she didn't ride a donkey on that road, because if you've ever spent any time on the back of any equine, whether it's donkey or horse. See, I used to give trail rides when I was in college, right? In the
Hmm.
mountains in Colorado, right? So I know what it's like to be on the back of a horse on a winding trail where you're going up and down and making turns and stuff like that. And you've got to ride that horse. You can't just sit there and relax,
Right.
So try to imagine doing that while pregnant. Oh,
That
good
could.
God.
Yeah, that could even cause a miscarriage too, just
Yeah.
by
Well,
the
now
bouncing
the,
up and
the
down. Yeah.
irony is that I also uncovered that in ancient times, riding a horse was often used to induce labor.
I can see that.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
because if you've reached maximum, duration of the pregnancy, and it's not coming, the kid's not coming. Okay, we'll put her on a horse and bounce her around a little bit, and
Yeah.
and see what happens, right? But yeah, there's all these questions about, would she ride a donkey? Could she ride a donkey? Which road did they take? Because in order to ride a donkey, it better be pretty straight and flat, you know,
Right. Right. Yeah.
or be, so all these things combine to, help us figure this out. And then to top it all off, and this is opening up a whole nother scenario in the story, is that I have now become convinced that when Mary revealed to Joseph that she was pregnant,
Hmm.
that the two of them very quickly determined that they needed to leave Nazareth immediately,
Because of the
because of
punishment, or what?
the reputation that
Right.
could, if she were discovered. Because here it is again, back in the proto-evangelium of James, she is publicly discovered, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
And they're put on trial. She and Joseph are put on trial in the proto-evangelium of James for having committed a crime, because she's publicly discovered as being pregnant, right?
Yeah.
Well, that's not how it went down. um, I believe ready for this?
Yes.
I believe that Mary revealed to Joseph that she was pregnant on their wedding night.
Whoa. Whoa.
Yeah. And it's perfect,
Huh.
because you have to dissect what a Jewish marriage and wedding would have looked like. Okay? Because
Mhm.
once you do that, it makes sense, right?
Why
So
she would tell him? Why she would tell him? The
right.
night.
Yes. Well, so bear with me for a second here.
Yeah.
Right. So in Jewish tradition, a Jewish marriage had two primary components: the betrothal and then the nuptials. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So the betrothal is when the bride and groom are promised to each other, and the wedding contract is cut. The wedding covenant is cut and validated, right?
Mm-hmm.
And this was a day and time when they practiced, arranged marriages, right?
All right. Right.
So the two fathers of the two children would have already met and discussed, my son, your daughter, they're getting married. Here's what the marriage covenant is going to look like. We're going to promise this. We're going to do that, XYZ, da 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 da. Now so we'll have the betrothal ceremony on this date, right? And we'll read the marriage contract. We'll drink a cup of wine to validate the contract. And now they are betrothed. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
But betrothal was way above and beyond what we would call engagement today. This couple, once they are betrothed, they are effectively married. Okay.
Right.
But they're not cohabiting yet. And the groom is not financially responsible yet. The bride remains with her father, right? While the groom goes and builds the wedding chamber. Okay.
What's the wedding
called
chamber?
the huppah. Okay.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
He goes and he builds this special room, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, this is extremely important because this language can be found all throughout scripture. So once we know what to look for, it makes impeccable sense, right? So after the betrothal contract has been signed, right?
Mm-hmm.
The groom returns to his father's home and begins building this wedding chamber. So it would either be a room that he would add onto his father's house, or it would be separate but on the same property, right? Mm-hmm. So this was a special room where he and his bride would spend their honeymoon, quote unquote, right?
Yeah.
Because a Jewish wedding was 7 days long. Okay.
Yeah.
So, and this is perfect because, Joseph, the adopted father of Jesus, we know that he was a craftsman. He was a builder, right?
Right.
We call him a carpenter, but it's the Greek word teknon, which really meant builder, would have been a better word because he would have been skilled in building with stone and wood and metal. Okay.
So that's the difference between a teknon and a carpenter?
Yeah, because if it was truly a carpenter, it would have used a different word.
Right,
a teknon is a builder, right?
Okay.
So you're talking about someone eminently qualified to build this huppah, this wedding chamber, right? And then what would happen is that the groom's father, because see the groom, right? And we know this because we're men, right? Mm-hmm. If you and I were living under this scenario, it would be run back, build a wedding changer, bam, 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 hammer a couple of nails. Okay, go get her. Right. Yeah. Okay. But it's the groom's father that determined when the wedding chamber was ready.
Oh, wow.
Okay. And when his son could go retrieve his bride.
So if it wasn't up to their liking, no, keep working on it.
Right. That's right. Exactly. See, because a young man who's impulsive, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. Mm-hmm. He's going to do it fast and furious and let's get on with the show. Right.
Right.
But if your dad is looking over your shoulder, right, and mm-hmm. he's saying, wait, time out, patience, learn a little wisdom here from old dad. Mm. Take your time, make it right. I'll tell you when it's time. Right.
Right.
So traditionally, this would take up to a year. Okay.
What?
Right. This would take up to a year. So now think about it. Joseph and Mary are betrothed.
Right.
Okay. Because when we're introduced to them in scripture, we are told they're betrothed. Right.
Right. Yeah.
But they are still living separately because that's what you did. Joseph is building the huppah. Mary is living with her father. Okay. Mm-hmm. Waiting, because then when Joseph's father releases him, he's going to go. So let me jump forward for a second. So when Joseph's father would release him, he and a bunch of his buddies would, in a very festive activity, would make this parade through town at midnight. Okay. And they would be blowing trumpets and banging on drums and having this celebration and making all this noise. And he would go steal his bride. Okay. Now it's all pre-planned and everybody knows what's going to happen.
Okay.
So it's not a literal kidnapping. Okay.
Okay.
It's this very festive moment when, see, because think about it. If you're the girl, right, you know this is coming.
Right. Yeah.
Okay? You know this is coming, and all of a sudden, one night you hear all this banging and yelling and trumpets and stuff outside the house. You know, and then your beloved, your groom, opens the door and says, "Okay, let's go," and off they go. Right? Steals. So it's this very romantic thing if you understand what it would have been like. But then they go back to the wedding chamber. Right?
Oh, I see.
And they enter into the wedding chamber and they are secluded in there for 7 days. Okay. And we know why, because it's an opportunity for the bride and groom to get to know each other a little better. Right. So, you know,
can you elaborate a little bit on that?
Yeah. Well, they're going to consummate the marriage. Right. But now think about it. Right. Think about it. Mary is pregnant
already. Yeah.
And in that culture, if you get caught, now technically, and this is something new, I just learned this literally in the last 6 months. There is a verse, and I can't quote it. I'd have to look it up because this is so new. I haven't had the chance to really work it over yet. But there is a verse I found in the Old Testament that says, if a betrothed woman is found to be with child, you don't execute her.
If she's betrothed, but if she's not
betrothed, but she's not betrothed, that's adultery, and that would run the risk of capital punishment of her being stoned to death. Right now, I would imagine that was still an outside possibility, because if you've got hyper-religious people, right, and you discover a woman pregnant, even if she's betrothed, but it's before the time that she and Joseph were supposed to come together and consummate the marriage, yeah, you run into the wrong people, they might still say stoner, right?
Right.
But that's where we get in the record in Matthew, where it says Joseph, being a just or righteous man, determined not to embarrass her, but to put her away privately. So he was going to divorce her when he discovered that she was pregnant. But then it says that while he slept, an angel appeared to him in a dream and said, "Fear not to take unto you Mary your wife." Okay. So he wakes up from this dream and he consummates the marriage. So now you can see the picture I'm talking about, right?
Yeah.
Mary is, I estimate, only about maybe 4 months pregnant, right, when they have what's called the nuptials, right? So the betrothal was a year earlier. Now it's the nuptials, right, where they're supposed to come together and consummate the marriage. So Joseph goes, he's released by the huppah is ready. He's released by his father. He goes the, quarter mile down the road in their small village to find Mary, and they go back to the huppah. They go inside, they close the door, and it is time to consummate the marriage. And Mary says, "Oh, by the way, there's something I have got to tell you."
Oh my God. Can you imagine the look on his face? What?
Well, and again, we gloss over this, but in the Greek, he was livid.
Oh, I bet.
Which of course you would be. I mean, okay, again, here we are, two guys talking about this. Yeah, if that happened to me, I would be out of my mind angry, right? So, or at the very least, you can picture Joseph putting his hands, putting his head in his hands and going, "Oh my God, what do I do?"
Yeah, probably going through shell shock moment.
Yeah, just total shell shock and going, "Oh my God, what do I do?" And he's livid, but then and here's the thing. So they're supposed to consummate the marriage, right? And now she drops this nuclear bomb on him, and he's like, I have no idea what to do.
Yeah.
I'm so angry, I can't see straight. So he goes, fine, forget it. I'm going to roll over and get some sleep. Right?
Yeah.
Because, you're exhausted because if he showed up at midnight, so now it's 2 a.m., 4 a.m., you have no idea. Right.
Yeah.
And they've had this massively emotionally draining moment. Right. And so it's like, fine, I'm not going to make a decision right now. I'm going to sleep on it or whatever. Right.
Right.
Some, frustrated form of trying to figure out what's going on. But then an angel appears to him in a dream and says, no, the child that is within her is of the Holy Ghost, of the Holy Spirit. Wake up, consummate the marriage. Right. Which is really amazing because, see, here's something else. There's another part of this equation. When the couple, see, this actually had to happen over a matter of several hours. Okay. And here's why. When the bride and the groom would go into the wedding chamber, the friends of the bridegroom, or in other words, the equivalent of the best man, they would hang out waiting outside until the marriage was consummated, and the couple would produce what are called the tokens of virginity, which is the blood-stained sheets.
Are you serious?
Totally. Yeah. Now, don't get me wrong. I don't think this would have been, they would have waited there for like 2 hours until Jojo hands off the sheets, right? It would have been overnight. And then the next morning, Joseph would have opened the door and handed them outside and said, hey, look, here they are, right? Proof she's a virgin, right?
Yeah, yeah.
But here's the amazing thing. She was a virgin.
Right, of course.
Right? So the irony is they could still provide the tokens of virginity. They were still completely valid.
Right.
Because she was a virgin, right? So this is the amazing accuracy of Scripture and how these things could fit together that just, it blows me away, Max. I can't get away from this stuff, right? And then to top it off, all of this is because, so now they've got 7 days where they are secluded in the chuppah for them to go, okay, well, what are we going to do?
Right. And they come up with a plan.
And they come up with the plan. Well, you're only 4 months pregnant, right? Which all depends upon the woman, of course. May or may not be enough to show just yet. But if you're talking loose-fitting robes of the ancient Middle East,
you're not going to show.
You're not going to show yet, right? So if they act quickly, they can get out of there before anybody knows.
Wow.
Right? So I have really reached the conclusion that they didn't travel at 9 months pregnant. They didn't travel at 8 months pregnant. They didn't travel at 7 months pregnant. They determined to leave immediately, right?
Yeah.
And I think it was just a matter of providential timing that this decree came out from Augustus Caesar in the early summer of 3 BC that said everybody's got to register, right? And because both of them were of the house and lineage of David, they went, oh my God, this is perfect.
Yeah.
This is perfect. We have the perfect opportunity to get out of here. See?
So that's when they decided to go because of that.
Pardon me? Say that again?
That's where they decided to go because of it was kind of like you said, perfect timing, and it was pretty much. I mean, if we're talking biblical now, it was pretty much planned out to be like that.
Yes. Oh, yeah. Providentially, right? God being sovereign and God being omniscient and knowing everything and all powerful and all that stuff. He had clearly planned this in advance because part of the story I've left out is the fact that when Mary discovered she was pregnant, she made the trip to Judea already to visit her relative Elizabeth, right? The mother of John the Baptist. So Mary had actually already made this trip there. I love saying it this way. She had already made the trip there and back again once, right? To Judea and back. And then now they have the nuptials. She drops this bomb on Joseph. They're secluded in the chuppah for 7 days. And they go, well, what are we going to do? well, we're going to leave. That's what we're going to do. We're going to get out of here. And then providentially, this decree comes down, and it's like, well, we've got the perfect excuse now. We've got to go to Bethlehem. And you know what? We're going to go to Bethlehem, and we just won't come back.
Right. And they won't question it
And
because,
no,
yeah.
because
Yeah.
it's Joseph's ancestral hometown. No one will question it.
Wow.
No one will question it.
That is amazing.
Yeah. And so, in my opinion, that's how it went down.
See, that makes more sense, and it's more, it feels more concrete than she was 9 months. They showed up. She popped the baby. You know what I mean? Like physically, and like we said earlier, in real life, it would not be like that.
No, it would not.
Yeah.
It would not be like that, because I don't care if you're the Messiah. Childbirth is messy.
Yes, and
Right?
and the traveling and all that, like, it would just cause complications. And that's the other thing too. You mentioned earlier that they would put them on a horse or donkey to have them
Induced labor. Yeah.
correct. Right now, imagine at 9 months she's traveling in the middle of the traveling. That could happen.
Are you crazy? It's just crazy. And then to add another very fun component to this, right? Because this is the depth of the research I've done. I also looked into, okay, were there hotels and motels at that time?
Right.
And yes, there were, but they actually hadn't been around very long. The notion of a traveler's inn, really, ready for this? It really only goes back to about, in the Middle East, goes only back to about 500 BC.
Wow.
Okay. It doesn't go back as far as we would think it would. You would think, oh yeah, they've been around forever. No, they haven't. They not the way we think. So it's not that they didn't exist. They did exist, but they weren't common, right? And they definitely were not common in small villages. Okay. They
that makes
really
sense.
they would have been very convenient. Here, ready for this? It makes total sense, right? They would have been very conveniently spaced about 1 day's travel apart.
What do you mean?
Meaning that about 20 or 25 miles. In other words, if
Tim, you there? Oh wow, this has never happened. Technical difficulties, everybody. Hold on.
Here we go. It's just going to take a second.
No worries.
My computer just does this weird glitchy thing.
Yeah, you were skipping.
Yeah. I don't know if it has to do with my interface or what it is, but every once in a while it just goes boink and just decides to stop, and it takes it about 10 to 15 seconds to reset. It's really infuriating. I hope it never happens in a recording session.
Well, yeah, I mean, it was crazy. You were skipping like a record right now.
Yeah, and all of a sudden I just wasn't there, right?
Yeah.
It's something with my gear that goes weird for a second. So anyway, so like I said, it's not that travelers' inns didn't exist. They did, but they were not as ubiquitous as they are now. You couldn't go now. Maybe in Jerusalem you have several, right, to choose from, but in Bethlehem's way too small. It's way too small to need a traveler's inn, right? So because Bethlehem was probably somewhere between 200 and 600 people. That's it.
Oh, wow.
It's small, right?
It is, yeah.
So yeah, you don't need a traveler's inn in a village that small, right?
Yeah.
Also, ready for this? In 150 years of archaeological digs in and around Bethlehem, they've never found a traveler's inn.
Which goes back to the words that they
right?
translated.
Because I mean, if you've been doing archaeological digs in and around Bethlehem for 150 years now, wow. And even if you didn't find the inn, okay, if you found a inn, an inn, right? At least you'd be, digging up some evidence. But they've never found such a thing. But plus, now here we go, and this is one of my favorite parts of this, right? This was a hospitality culture. That's the whole point.
Right. I remember you said that.
all through the Old Testament, the Jews are told to be hospitable, to entertain your neighbor, to entertain your strangers, right?
Mm-hmm.
So the way it worked is if you were a traveler and you arrived in a small town, you would go into the town square and you would sit down.
I remember,
And,
yeah.
right? And the
Yeah.
culture would have been that the locals, it would have been incumbent upon them to approach you and say, do you need a place to stay?
Mm-hmm.
And then you would say, yes, I do. And they would take you to their home and put you up in the guest room.
So they
Okay?
all had guest rooms. That's just how it was. Right?
It was common. It wasn't not everybody, because if you weren't,
yeah,
didn't have enough money, but it was common to have a guest room, right?
Right.
Plus, there's the fact that this is Joseph's ancestral hometown,
Mm-hmm.
right? So that means a couple of things are very, very likely, right? Number one is that they already knew someone there, that he already had extended family and already knew them. Now, it's unclear whether he could have sent advance notice, right?
Right.
Because they did have a mail system. The Romans did especially, but it's not like our mail system today. So it's unclear whether he could have warned somebody in advance. But again, we know that that Mary made the trip already. Mary went to visit Zachariah and Elizabeth. Okay.
Right.
And in a pilgrimage culture where Joseph would have had to have traveled to Jerusalem several times a year for the feasts, it's completely reasonable to think that he had already been to Bethlehem several times, right?
Right.
And that especially if he had family there, he could have just walked right in the door for all we know,
Right. They wouldn't have to go in the center and say, "We need a house."
Yeah, no, he would have been able to walk right into Bethlehem, walk right up to his relative's house and say, hey, Uncle Levi, I'm here, and then the other thing is okay, well, let's say he didn't have extended family, right?
Mm-hmm.
Nonetheless, in a hospitality culture, they could have just walked right into the town square, sat down, and someone would have said, "Oh, come stay with us," right?
Yeah.
Let alone when he announced the fact that this was his ancestral hometown, that he's from the house and lineage of David.
Mm-hmm.
He's royalty. Max, that means he's a celebrity.
Yeah.
Every house in Bethlehem would have opened up to him, because all he would have had to done is say, my name is Joseph, I'm the son of so-and-so, the son of so-and-so, the son of so-and-so, the son of David, and bam, every house in Bethlehem would have opened up to him.
Because it would be an honor to have him there at that point.
Right. It would have been an honor to have him in their house. Yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah.
You mentioned that she traveled prior, right?
Right.
Now, do you think, I don't know if there's anything that says this, but do you think that maybe she traveled ahead to plan for them to travel?
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. Yeah. It was a reconnaissance mission. Yes.
Exactly. That's exactly what I was thinking. So then the question is there anything that indicates that that's why she went, or they just said she traveled?
No, you just got to put the pieces of the puzzle together, right? This is speculation, and I admit that it's speculation. Right. But in my opinion, this is how historical research works, right? Mm-hmm. Historical research is very different than scientific research. The scientific method is that you develop a repeatable experiment that you can control, right?
Okay.
We're going to combine 2 hydrogen atoms and 1 oxygen atom, and we're going to perform that experiment 1,000 times under controlled conditions. And guess what? We got water every single time, right? Mm. That's the scientific method. But the rules of evidence for historical research.
No, it froze again. Dang it. We'll wait. This is the fun part about doing this live.
Yeah, yes.
There we go. Okay. Did you hear me?
Yes, I did. What was weird is it didn't I just got a warning message that says your internet connection is unstable.
Yeah, it happens.
Yeah, no kidding. Well, it's weird because you said, "Oh my God, it froze again," and I'm sitting there going, "No, it didn't. I'm fine." And then but okay.
Yeah.
Anyway, but God darn it, sorry, folks, technical difficulties.
Yeah, it happens.
That's what a bummer. Anyway, what was I saying? So so the rules of evidence for historical research are different than the rules of evidence for scientific research. And that's very important because we're living in a day and time when everybody's going, follow the science, follow the science. And it's like, well, sorry, history doesn't work like science does. It's very different. So the rules and ironically, the rules for historical evidence are almost identical to the rules for evidence in a court of law. Okay. So when you're trying to make your case for something historically, you have to imagine like presenting it as a legal case in a court of law, right?
Okay, I can see that.
Okay, because so imagine this: you and I are sitting on a jury, right? Okay, and it's a murder case. Okay.
Okay.
And the prosecution says, well, we've got tire tracks from the accused's car at the scene. And we have blood evidence from the accused at the scene. And we have DNA evidence from the accused at the scene. And we've got external security camera footage of the accused at the scene. And you keep getting pieces and pieces and pieces and pieces and pieces of evidence. The only thing you don't have is you don't have an eyewitness, right?
Right.
It's the only thing we don't have is, oh yeah, such and such a person walked into the house and shot him, right? You don't have but you've got all this evidence that points to the fact that he was there at the correct time. We have security camera footage that shows the accused at the scene 1 hour prior to the time of death, and so because I've actually done research into cold case evidence that you can and you do convict people based on circumstantial evidence.
Right. Yeah.
Now we've all watched too much television, and we think that circumstantial evidence doesn't prove anything. Yes, it does. It all depends on how much circumstantial evidence you have, because if you've got one piece of circumstantial evidence or two or three, okay, well that's not very much. But if you've got 20 or 30 or 50 pieces of circumstantial evidence, that's where we get this phrase reasonable doubt. Okay.
Yeah. Have you ever seen the movie My Cousin Vinny?
Oh, of course. Yeah.
Okay, that's exactly what you're describing. They had all this evidence, and they just needed a witness. But I mean, if it wasn't obviously because of the way the film was written, but if it wasn't for key factors that proved their innocence, all the evidence showed that they were guilty.
Exactly right. Yeah. See, because it points to right. So you and me sitting on the jury, when all of the evidence points to a certain conclusion, there's this thing called reasonable doubt, because so that also means there's a thing called unreasonable doubt, right?
Right.
Because so let's say you and I are sitting in that courtroom and we're listening to all this evidence, and the defense gets up and says, and he's interviewing, what's the word we're looking for here? A
witness? Not a witness.
No. Professional testimony, right?
Yeah.
Someone who is who testifies, who's an expert testimony.
Expert, yeah.
Right? So there's some expert testimony going on, and the defense attorney gets up and says, "Mr. So-and-so, isn't it possible that despite all of this evidence that the accused is innocent?" Well, of course it's possible, but that's not the right question. Because if a defense attorney asked that question, the prosecuting attorney would object. And he would be sustained, because what he would do is he'd say, "Your Honor, that's not what we're talking about here. We're not talking about the possibility that the accused might be innocent. We're talking about the fact that we have 100 pieces of evidence that points to him being guilty, and therefore it is a reasonable conclusion that he did it.
Right, exactly.
Okay, so historical evidence works the same way. Okay, so when you're building your case for historical evidence, and you can say, well, here's what we know. We know that this happened, this happened, this happened, this happened, this 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 8, 10, 12, 37, 94, all these things happened. Therefore, we are going to draw a reasonable conclusion that this is what happened. So all of that background to say, when Mary discovered she was pregnant, she went on a reconnaissance mission because she determined, I've got to leave.
Yeah.
I can't stay here. If I get discovered to be pregnant outside of wedlock, there's a very outside possibility, A, I could be killed, I could be executed, right?
Yeah.
But even if everything goes my way, you know, it's really a wacko scenario. But yeah, so it took me a long time to get there, but I eventually reached the conclusion that, number one, when Mary realized she was pregnant, she determined that she had to leave Nazareth as soon as possible, that the trip to Judea to meet with her cousin Elizabeth was reconnaissance mission and intelligence gathering, because she needed to ask somebody, what do I do?
Right, exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
And Elizabeth is perfect because she's a relative and she's 90 miles away.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay? Because there's no way she can rat her out. Okay? And also, by the way, Zechariah, the husband, right, the father of John the Baptist, he very conveniently got struck mute by the angel, when he couldn't believe that he was going to be a father at 60 years old. Right? You know that part of the story?
No, I didn't know that.
So this is Mary's relatives, who are the mother and father of John the Baptist, right? Who is, the forerunner before the Messiah. He's the one that came and announced Jesus and said, prepare you the way of the Lord. There cometh one behind me, who is greater than I, right? And John's their conception was miraculous as well, in that they were an elderly couple who had been childless, and Zechariah was a priest, and he went into the temple in Jerusalem one day to offer incense, to burn incense on the golden altar of incense, and he had a vision, and an angel appeared to him and says, your prayers have been answered. You're going to be a father, right? And you're going to dedicate this child, and he's going to be the forerunner of the Messiah, and you're going to name him John, and blah 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 blah, and all this stuff, right? So the angel gives him all these stipulations. Well, because he doubts the vision, it says that the angel strikes him mute. He can't talk.
Wow.
And that when he came out from the temple, it says the crowd that was gathered perceived that he had seen a vision, and that he had to communicate with like hand signals and by writing stuff down, right?
Wow.
Yeah. So, but the point of that being is that when Mary came to visit Zechariah and Elizabeth, Zechariah couldn't tell anybody.
Right.
Because he's mute,
Yeah. Well, that also because it happened, it happened to him. So
right. Well, yeah. So so providentially, again, they're the perfect people to talk to, because now Mary needs some advice, and they're perfect because they're older, they're wiser, and go figure, they're going through the same thing, right?
Yeah. Wow.
And with regard to Elizabeth, for a slightly different reason, because they're married and it's legitimate and there's no weirdness there, but they are older, right? Their estimates are that Zechariah was at least 60 years old, right?
Wow.
So if she's postmenopausal, how'd she get pregnant, right?
Right.
And it says that she hid herself. She concealed herself for at least 5 months.
Really?
Yeah. Which now that sounds much more like privacy than anything else, but it's still a very provocative component of the bigger story.
Right. Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
now this is starting to sound more like Tom Clancy than it is, the Gospel of Luke. That this is more like a spy novel, because they've got to hide themselves. They've got to conceal a secret, and the whole yeah.
Can you imagine the levels of stress, that they're just both couples are going through just because they have to hide and they gotta, perfect
Oh,
timing.
it's incredible. And it's funny that you should mention that, because I've often thought that about biblical characters, right?
Mhm.
Frankly, based upon my own experience, that if you are Mary and Joseph under these circumstances, or you think about any one of a handful of prominent biblical characters that were given these extraordinary dreams or visions or revelations, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, look at the story of Abraham. Abraham is 75 years old, and his wife is 65 years old. They've been childless their entire life, and God appears to them and says, "You're going to have a kid." Okay. Well, by the time she actually does have a baby, she is clearly postmenopausal, and Abraham isn't functioning fully anymore either.
Right.
Okay. So both sides of the equation are biologically incapable. And yet they have this promise, okay, from God that says this will happen, right?
Yeah.
So how do you cognitively deal with what you believe to be a revelation from God, a dream or a vision or a prophetic word or something like that? How do you handle that when all your circumstances say this is beyond impossible?
Right. That's what I'm saying. Like just going through that, and then having the kid, and
right, not run of the mill impossible.
Yeah.
Ridiculous impossible, and you have the same thing with Joseph, the prophet Joseph, the patriarch Joseph. He has these dreams of his family bowing down to him, right? And then his own family sells him into slavery, and then he gets falsely accused of sexual assault and gets thrown in jail, right? For all he knows, for the rest of his life. And then all of a sudden, miraculously and spectacularly, he gets released, winds up being the prime minister of Egypt, and his family comes and bows down to him, right? But if you're in the middle of that, if you're in prison, if you're Joseph and you're in prison, oh my God, the stress had to just be ridiculous. Or David gets anointed king of Israel, and then he spends the next 10 years running from King Saul, who's literally trying to kill him.
Wow.
So these stories are just stunningly amazing. And you're correct, very observant, Max, very observant. The level of stress had to be just beyond.
Of course,
next level.
And people nowadays, what are we stressed about? Our phones not charging,
Yeah, right.
Yep. It's just because I can't imagine. I mean, I have a somewhat stressful life, but I can't even think or pretend. I can't pretend to imagine what that feels like at their age. Number one, how primitive living was, technology back then, right?
Yep.
And having no access to resource sometimes, even someone to say, hey, I need to get this off my chest, because if you do, they might tell someone that'll get you stoned. You know what I mean? Like, wow.
Yeah, because when you think about it, they lived in Nazareth, and Nazareth was also a very small village. Same thing, probably only somewhere between about 200 and 600 people. Right?
Yeah.
And Nazareth was a new village. Not only was it small, it was relatively new. It probably hadn't existed for more than 20 years when Joseph and Mary, were brought up in this little village called Nazareth. Right?
Yeah.
They were probably some of the first children ever born in Nazareth. So it's this dinky little village, and if you're in a dinky little village, everybody knows everybody. Right?
Of course.
And all of a sudden you're pregnant. Whoa!
Everybody knows.
And everybody knows. Bing, yeah, bang, just like that. Everybody knows. Yep.
Wow. All right, I'm gonna fast forward here
Go ahead. Yes.
several years. Well, first of all, is there? I don't know this. I'm very ignorant, but is there an age where he was crucified?
Yeah. Well, yeah, there is. I mean, there's so if we play the same game, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it's not a game, but if we follow the same principles of taking our evidence. See, I described it. It's funny. This is my second podcast today. I did one earlier today, and I used the exact same illustration. I want you to imagine putting together a jigsaw puzzle.
Yeah.
That you don't have a picture on the box to go by.
I've done that.
Okay.
I can. Yeah.
Because you have no idea what the picture is.
Right.
Right. You have no idea. All I know is that I got a 1,000-piece jigsaw puzzle and I got a big table and I have no idea what the picture is. So you dump out all the pieces, you flip them all over right side up, and you start sorting them for a puzzle. You usually start sorting them by color, right?
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So my border piece is here and my red piece is here and my blue piece is here. And then very slowly you start going, oh, look, these two fit together. And then very, very slowly the picture starts coming into view and you realize, oh, that's a man paddling a canoe, or
Yeah.
whatever the heck it is. Right. Well, that's what we're doing. That's what historical research is like.
Mm-hmm.
We may or may not have written accounts. Okay. Because we do, right? Have written accounts of what it looked like, but we don't have a person to tell us, or we don't have pictures, we don't have photographs, we don't have film. So you've got to put the puzzle together to determine, okay, what did this look like, right?
Yeah.
So back to your question, when did Jesus die? How old was he when he died?
Mm-hmm.
And how do we know, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
How do we know?
Okay. So there is one very clear verse of scripture that says when Jesus began his public ministry, he was about 30 years old.
Oh, wow.
Okay.
Wow.
So and unfortunately I don't have the citation memorized. I know it's in Luke, and it's in Luke chapter 3. The latter part of chapter 2 or the early part of chapter 3 is where there's this citation that says, and Jesus began to be about 30 years of age. And that's when he began his public ministry. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So that's when he began to preach and teach and things and do miracles and stuff like that. And then the conventional chronology is that his public ministry lasted for 3.5 years.
See, I believe that a lot because 30 is a good age because you have, you grow out of the adolescent mentality, number one,
Right.
and you're
Yeah.
seasoned.
Well, that
so
was
would
that
make
was
sense.
considered to be the true age of adulthood. That
I
even
agree.
though even though you got married at as a late teenager, usually
Mhm.
in that culture, that gave you a chance to get married, to start having your kids, and get some real life experience all through your 20s, to the point where when you hit 30 years old, you're an adult.
Yeah.
You know a thing or two, right?
Yeah.
You've been working for 10 plus years. You got a wife and some kids. You're responsible. Okay, good. 30 years old is good. So yeah, so like I said, we know for sure that he began his public ministry at 30 years of age, and that most scholars believe that his public ministry was about 3.5 years long. There is some debate about that. There are some scholars that disagree and make it much shorter. I tend to agree with the 3.5 year mark.
Okay.
Yeah, which is interesting because we now know by correcting his birth date, right,
Mm-hmm.
that he was, not born on Christmas. He was born in the fall. We know for sure he died in the spring. So, guess what? The half year's correct. We know that.
Yeah.
So when someone says that, his public ministry is about 3.5 years. Okay, the half year mark, we know that's good because we know he began his ministry roughly around his birthday, right?
Yeah.
And that 3.5 years later, he was dead.
So just to remind everybody, he was born September 11th.
Yes. September 11th, 3 BC.
3 BC, ladies
3
and gentlemen.
BC, right?
3 BC.
Which
September
means,
11th.
what is today? Today the 30th, right?
Today is the 30th, correct?
Today is the 30th because I had to refresh because, I've done so much research on so many things over the years that I remember a lot of it, but I can't regurgitate all of it.
Yeah.
Boom, boom, boom. And so I had to review some of my notes and stuff like that. And because the nativity has been my predominant focus,
Mhm.
I had to review my notes on the resurrection. And because if he was born September 11th,
Mhm.
3 BC, then all you've got, and his ministry was 3.5 years long, right?
Mhm.
All we've got to do is determine what day Passover was. I think it's 30. See, I did the math and I don't have it memorized. It's because if he was born in, let's do it. Let's you and me do it together.
Okay.
So if he was born in 3, he
Mhm.
turned 1 in the year 2 BC. And then he became 2 in the year 1 BC. He became 3 in the year 1 AD. He became 4 in the year 2, right?
Right.
So that means he would have turned 30 in the year 28 AD. Okay.
Oh, because we're counting. Yeah. Okay.
Right? Because there's no year 0, right?
Right.
So he turned 30 in the year 28, which means 31 would have been 29,
Mhm.
32 would have been 30,
Correct.
and then 33 AD is when, God.
So
God darn
31
it. No.
AD.
Yeah. So,
Yeah, I wrote it down.
yeah. So, yeah, exactly. You got it. See, I had to do that exact same thing. So he turned 30 and 28,
Mm-hmm.
31 and 29,
Correct.
32 and 30,
Correct.
and 33 in the year 31, right?
Right.
So, but that's in the fall. So it's the following spring, right? So it would have been the spring of 32 AD. Would have
So
been
then he could
Passover
he
32
could have
AD
been,
would have been when he died.
right. He could have been 34. But
Right.
you're right.
Well, yeah. I mean, this one's mathematical prophecies are always really sticky because number one, transposing the calendars is really weird because you got to transpose from the Julian calendar, the Gregorian calendar, and then the Hebrew calendar. And if anybody made a mistake, it's
God.
like
Yeah.
you have no clue, right? So, all of this makes a lot of sense and it can get us, pretty darn pinpoint accurate. I mean, but the reason I say this is that I was chewing over my notes and I'm reasonably certain he was crucified on the equivalent of March 30th, 32 AD, which is today.
Which is today, ladies and gentlemen. This is not a coincidence. I want to tell you that now.
Yeah. So, but that I could easily be off by a couple of days on that because we do know he was crucified during Passover season, and
Right.
there's some amazing details about that I'm assuming is what we're frankly about to discuss now.
Yeah, I actually let's get rid of the tradition thing.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Well, okay. First of all, when you're saying Passover, when is actual Passover? Like, when is it supposed to be?
So once again, let's revisit some of our foundational premises here.
Right.
The Bible is very clear that ritual can be a very cool thing, right?
Yeah.
In the Old Testament, the Jews were told to commemorate the Passover. In the New Testament, we are told to commemorate the Lord's death and resurrection. So ritual and tradition can be a very cool thing, right? We're told to do it in the Bible, right?
Yeah.
And yet at the same time, Jesus blasted the Pharisees for their traditions.
Right.
Because their traditions had gotten out of hand and their traditions had become self-important. That the tradition became the end unto itself, right?
Mm-hmm.
See, and I get this question a lot with regard to this subject matter. People will flat out ask me, well, so what if he wasn't born on December 25th? Isn't it more important that we're celebrating his birthday? And it's like, well, no, it's not. Okay. So, because for example, ask a Jew, right? Mm-hmm. Is your tradition more important, or is it more important that you celebrate the Passover on the first full moon after the spring equinox? Because they are told precisely
Yeah.
when to do it. That the Passover is on the first full moon after the spring equinox, right? And so they know exactly when it's supposed to happen, right? So imagine if someone said, "Well, yeah, we've started a new tradition that we're going to celebrate the Passover on June 13th because June 13th only comes once a year," and it's like, wait a second, that doesn't make any sense at all,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And but if that were a tradition that were to develop independently, and then it gets its hooks in you, see, and that's the problem, is man-made traditions can get their hooks in you to where the tradition becomes more important than what it's about, right?
Yeah. It's
So
interesting. My grandma, we wouldn't celebrate Easter when Easter was. And I never understood why, and now it kind of makes sense. I think she would follow the
right.
moon.
See,
Yeah.
because here we go. So like I said, my primary work is on the nativity, and I've spent 30 years breaking down the tradition of the nativity and showing that it didn't go down like that. It went like this, and that the true story is actually way cooler.
Yeah, that's true.
Everything we've talked about, my God, what an amazing story. What an amazing story, right? So now when it comes to the death and resurrection, we have nowhere near the scale of inaccuracy. Okay.
What do you mean?
Well, meaning the scale of inaccuracy with regard to the nativity is enormous, right?
Okay.
Where we got the date off by 3 months. It didn't look anything like we think it did. He wasn't born in a stable. He was born in a Judean home. The Magi weren't there when he was born. They arrived a year and a half later. So the scale of the inaccuracies with the nativity are pretty stunning. Okay, we're really off when it comes to the nativity, but when it comes to the resurrection, we're nowhere near as far off. Okay, we have the timeline wrong. Okay, but that can be measured in hours or days, as opposed to months. Right? Okay.
Right.
But let me start with this. The word Easter is not in the Bible.
Yeah, where did it come from?
It is a transliteration of the Akkadian word Ishtar.
Okay.
Which is the Akkadian goddess of fertility.
Oh, okay. Okay, spring.
Right?
Yeah.
So there's the connection right there, because death and resurrection myths abound in ancient pagan religions. The notion of a death and resurrection myth is not new. Okay.
Yeah.
What sets the Bible apart is this happened to a real historical figure. And we can prove it. Okay.
Okay. Go on.
That's what makes the Bible different. Is the Bible is not about some mythical God who died and then was born again somehow. No, we're talking about a real, living, breathing human being that died and then 3 days and 3 nights later got up from the dead, and it was witnessed, right? And then those eyewitnesses wrote it down in books that we have today, and it is the singular most published book in the history of the world is the Bible, right? Yeah. And we have the evidence that is presented in the Bible that tells us that Jesus of Nazareth was a real person and this actually happened. And now I'm not an expert on the resurrection anywhere near like I am on the nativity, nowhere close. And part of that's because the resurrection has been done already by biblical scholars that are way better than me at this stuff. So if you ask me, and I'm not trying to avoid anything here, but you may ask me some questions that I'm going to go, I don't know. Sorry, I don't know the answer to that. Consult one of these other guys that has really, really, truly done this work, because there are biblical scholars that have done the work on the resurrection it's hair-splittingly accurate.
Wow.
I'm well versed in it, but not like they are. Nothing like they are.
That makes sense.
But yeah, Easter comes from the Mesopotamian word Ishtar, which was the goddess of fertility, And death and resurrection myths are not uncommon at all. It's just that what sets this apart is it's not a myth, it's history.
Right. Oh, yeah.
Okay, it really happened. But you can see the egg for a bazillion years has been a symbol of fertility, right?
Okay.
Okay, because I know you're going to ask me about Easter eggs, so I'm just going to go there.
Yeah.
Right?
Just go for it.
I'm just going to go there. So the egg for a bazillion years has been a symbol of fertility, right?
Yeah.
So what the early Christians did is they said, yeah, the egg is a symbol of the tomb, and therefore it is a symbol of the death and resurrection of Christ. Now that's not really biblical. You can't really point to the egg as a biblical symbol. You can't get there from here, right? Mm-hmm. But what happened was it's a concept known as syncretism. Syncretism is where you take two divergent traditions, find what is similar, and then mix them together. Because then that way you can make two different parties happy, or at least tolerable, because they both get to quote unquote keep their tradition, right?
Right. Okay.
So and Christmas and Easter are two glaring examples of Christian syncretism. And what I'm trying to do, just to be very, very clear and frankly kind of blunt, is that I'm taking a hammer to Christian syncretism and smashing it into a million little pieces. Because what I'm saying is that biblical truth is much more important than Christian syncretism and tradition.
I agree. I have to agree with you there, because that's where all these misleading or confusing timelines, let's just call them, come.
So so the word Easter isn't in the Bible. It's not there, not even once, ever, right? It is mistranslated in the King James once. In the book of Acts, it uses the word Easter one time, just once. But that's the English word Easter. But in the Greek, it's the Greek word Pesach, which is the equivalent of the Hebrew word for Passover. So it's clearly supposed to be the word Passover. And the Greek word for Passover is used roughly 30 times in the Bible, and it's translated correctly 29 times. And one time it's translated Easter out of nowhere for who knows what reason. So yeah, the title Easter is not in the Bible anywhere. It just simply isn't there at all. And it's, like I said 5 times now, transliteration of the Mesopotamian word Ishtar, which is the goddess of fertility. And because death and resurrection is a similar concept to birth or rebirth, right? That's how all these themes got mixed together. See, and a rabbit is ready for this. I mean, I'm not an expert on Easter traditions, like I am Christmas traditions, but the rabbit is a symbol of fertility. Okay, because breed like rabbits.
Right? Oh, okay, got it. Yeah.
Okay, it's a symbol of fertility, and also a lot of ancient scholars, for lack of a better word, believed that rabbits were hermaphrodites.
Really?
Yeah. So therefore, the rabbit became a symbol of the virgin birth.
Wow.
Okay. Wow. And that's twisted and it's wrong, and there's nothing biblical about it. But that's where it came from, nonetheless, because you have this weird notion of a hermaphroditic rabbit laying eggs that are the symbol of the tomb that Jesus. Oh God, it's just it just curls my nose hairs. It just drives me crazy, that we embrace these wacko traditions when the real story is a mind blower, just like the nativity is.
Yeah.
The accuracy, because let's go there. Let's talk about it. Let's jump in, right? And I know we'll play a game here, Max.
Okay.
Let's test your biblical knowledge.
Oh, it's very bad.
I know it's bad. So you're the perfect test dummy.
Yes.
Okay. Or I shouldn't say it's bad. I know it's just not extensive. Okay. Right?
Or accurate. Let's be honest.
So what day of the week did Jesus get up on? that was he raised from the dead on?
Wednesday.
Not quite. What is the tradition? The tradition is that he got up
Friday.
on Easter
Sunday,
right?
Yeah.
Or we sometimes call it, if you're a Protestant, you call it Resurrection Sunday. Okay.
Yes. Okay.
So if you go to the 4 records in the 4 Gospels where the women come to anoint his body, right? So he's been crucified, he's been wrapped, because they would wrap him up very similar to a mummy, right?
Okay. Kind of like what they do when you're born.
Right, exactly.
Okay.
And he's been placed in a tomb, and it says that on the first day of the week, the women came very early in the morning to anoint his body with balms and spices.
So that was Monday?
No, it's Sunday, because Sunday was
Sunday.
the first day of the week. That part of it is
okay.
accurate.
Okay, got it.
But
got it.
the record reads very, very, very similarly to what I just said. So think about it for a minute. Very early on the first day of the week, the women came to anoint his body, and they discovered an empty tomb. Where in that statement does it say he got up?
Nowhere.
It doesn't. Exactly. No. And that's my point. The women discovered an empty tomb on the first day of the week. To determine when he got up, we have to look at other things.
Okay.
Because that does not tell us he got up on Sunday.
So that's another piece of evidence showing that it was taken literally.
Right, exactly. See, because the conjecture, right, once again, just very similar to the whole stable scenario in the Nativity, if the women arrived on the first day of the week to anoint his body, well, he got up on the first day of the week, right?
Right, yeah.
Well,
wow.
That's not an illogical conclusion, but there's no guaranteeing it's correct. All we know is that by that time, the tomb was empty.
Right.
Oh, so we got to look at other factors to determine when he got up.
So okay, so when was he placed? It was 3 days
exactly.
And 3 nights, right?
So you can do this one of 2 ways or both ways, which is you can either work forward from when he was crucified and then count 3 days and 3 nights, or you can work backward from the first day of the week, right, and see if you can get them to line up, right? Now, very importantly, let me stress this. There is a record in the Gospel of Matthew where Jesus is having one of his many confrontations with the Pharisees, right?
Okay, yeah.
And the Pharisees challenge him and they say, "Master, we would see a sign of thee," right? They want to see a sign. If you're the Messiah, then perform a miracle. And, which is really ironic because in that record in particular, he had just performed a miracle that in Jewish understanding would only be performed by the Messiah. Okay.
Really? What was that?
Yeah. So on the heels of performing this amazing miracle, they say, "Hey, show us another one." Right.
Wow.
So talk about hypocrites, right?
Yeah.
Master, show us a sign. We would see a sign of thee. And Jesus responds by saying, "You will not get any sign except the sign of the prophet Jonah." And then he says, "As Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the fish, so shall the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth." Okay? So it says very explicitly 3 days and 3 nights, minimum 72 hours.
Right.
There's no way you can get 72 hours from Good Friday to Easter Sunday, no matter how you count it.
No.
It is absolutely impossible. It can't be done. So he did not die on Good Friday. Okay? Sorry, not sorry. To all my Roman Catholic and Eastern Orthodox friends, he did not die on Good Friday. It's impossible. And that's even if he did get up on Sunday, it's still not possible.
Right, and that's just math.
Yeah, it's just like
just math. Yeah.
sorry, right? So let's just play with the math for a second. So
Okay.
let's throw out a hypothesis.
Okay.
So if he didn't get up, so they discover an empty tomb like at sunrise or like before sunrise on Sunday, right?
Right.
So the question becomes, did Jesus get up 5 minutes earlier or 5 hours or 12 hours earlier?
Right.
Right? Well, let's just take a stab at it and let's say he got up on Saturday afternoon.
Okay.
Let's just mess with that for a second. Let's say he got up late the previous day.
Okay.
Okay. Well, if you back up 72 hours, you get Wednesday afternoon.
Right.
Okay. So if the other pieces of evidence line up, what you've got is a scenario that looks like this. He died mid to late afternoon on Wednesday. Then he spent 1, 2, 3 days in the heart of the earth, was raised from the dead late afternoon, early evening on what we would call Saturday, right? The night goes past, the women show up, and they discover the empty tomb. Okay. Now, I haven't presented a truckload of evidence yet, but I just present that because that's the hypothesis that I believe is correct. That he would have died on a Wednesday afternoon and then got up very late on Saturday afternoon. Right.
Well, here's a question.
Mhm.
So he was crucified and then he was killed by the spear, right?
Well,
Now-
he was already dead at that point, but
Oh,
yes.
was he? Okay. I didn't know that.
Right.
Now,
And that's part of the evidence, by the way.
what do you mean?
That is part of the evidence. I'll explain. The fact that he was already dead when he was pierced with the spear is part of the evidence for how we know when he died.
Okay, got it. Okay, so my question is, did they didn't leave him like kind of like on the cross for a few days because why not? He's he's being punished. He's dead.
Bingo, you're nailing it, Max. You're nailing it. Yeah. So you just tripped right into a big piece of the evidence. Okay.
Okay.
So crucifixion was invented by the Persians, but then perfected by the Romans. Okay. And crucifixion was the most excruciating form of torture and death known to humanity at that time. It didn't get more cruel than to be crucified. Okay.
Right.
So let's take a minute and describe it. Because what they would do is the first thing they would do is they would beat you up.
Yep.
They would just use their fists and use clubs and baseball bats and just beat you to a pulp. Okay. Now it's very interesting to know that for Jesus, it says they put a bag over his head and then would beat him. And then they would taunt him by saying, prophesy who hit you.
Wow.
That if you're God or the Son of God, right, prophesy who hit you, right? So the first thing they do is they would just beat you, just beat the living daylights out of you, right?
Wow.
Then the next thing they would do is they would scourge you, which means they would take a whip to your back. Okay.
Yeah.
But this was no ordinary whip. This was a whip that had pieces of bone or metal interwoven into the leather. Okay.
Like in Passion of the Christ, how it would rip chunks of skin out. Okay.
Yeah. And there are some discrepancies in Passion of the Christ, but the Passion of the Christ in many ways is extremely accurate. The crucifixion scene it was still nowhere near, it was actually far more brutal than they were allowed to show. That's the best one we've ever seen on film. I mean, that it's ruthless, right?
Yeah.
So because for the purposes of crucifixion, the whole 40 stripes thing didn't apply, right? See, for other crimes there was a legal limit of 40 stripes, 40 lashes, right? But for crucifixion that didn't matter, right? So then they would scourge you, and that would just rip your back open like nobody's business, right?
Right.
Then there's the whole thing with Jesus of making him carry the cross and stuff like that to because if you weren't already exhausted, now you're really going to be exhausted, right?
Yeah.
And then comes how they would attach you to the cross. Now, the one thing we know pretty much for certain is that you were not staked out in this nice even T position, right?
Right. Yeah.
There's some debate whether there was actually even a cross member on the cross. There may have been. It's also possible there may not have been. It's also entirely possible that it was simply a vertical stake, right?
Okay.
And that instead of his arms being out this way, it's possible that his arms were above his head like this.
Oh, and they just nailed it through
Right.
both wrists.
Right,
Yeah.
through his wrists, right?
Yeah.
That's a possibility. But even if there was a cross member, let's see if I can actually kind of get on camera here. Here, let me back up. Instead of his arms being out like this, his arms would have been like this.
Okay.
Because what they did is when they put you on that vertical post, number one, they would tie a rope around your waist because they're about to put some spikes through your wrist and some spikes through your feet.
Mm-hmm.
A 200-pound man's going to pull that out.
Oh yeah. Oh,
Okay.
Yeah.
So they've got to tie a rope around you to keep you on the cross. Okay. And then also they would cut a notch in the vertical post for your heels to go in. Okay.
Instead of that little platform, right?
Right. Yeah. Well, yeah, they depict it as a platform or a notch. They'd like you do with an axe when you notch a tree, right?
Right. Exactly.
You put a notch in there so your heels could go in the notch. And the reason for that will become evident in a moment. So they would tie a rope around your waist. They would put your feet in this notch. They'd put your arms up like this. They would drive the spike through your wrist. Okay. Because here you're going in between the two bones of the wrist, the radius and the ulna. In your hand, you'd rip it out.
Oh,
but
yeah.
here you could get some traction on that, right?
Yeah.
But now it's all tied to what happens now that the person is on the cross. Because your ability to breathe is connected to your diaphragm is connected to your feet. It's always easiest to breathe when you're either standing or sitting, right? So, and what they're doing is they're going to suffocate him. Is what's going to happen. Because now, if you imagine all of the pieces put together, he's been beat ruthlessly. His back is laid open. He's up against a rough hewn beam deliberately. Open wounds against a rough hewn beam. And his arms are like this and his legs are bent and cocked to the side. His legs aren't straight. His legs are bent like this.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So his whole body is in this odd cocked bent shape, right? Curled up on it's almost fetal position. Almost.
Yeah.
Right.
I was gonna say that.
Almost fetal position on this cross. And all he wants to do, Max, is breathe. But when he tries to push with his feet to breathe, you feel the spike in your feet.
Oh.
And when you try to pull with, because now imagine trying to breathing when you're doing pull-ups, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Right. So now he tries to pull with his hands to get a breath, and it's the spikes in the wrist.
Oh man.
And he's doing this. He's scrubbing his back against that beam.
I see it now.
So now you get the picture. He is he's slowly bleeding to death and suffocating at the same time.
Oh man.
Okay.
Wow. Wow.
Right. Yeah. So it's excruciating because it's not, and there's the pain, of course. Right.
Right. Yeah.
But as you noted, because this was your question, and that's why I went to explain all this, this could last for days. Crucifixion typically lasted 2, 3, 4 days.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And that was intentional because it was supposed to be the most excruciating form of torture and death imaginable. Right. So the reason we know it's part of the evidence for when we know he was crucified is because it tells us very clearly in the scripture that the Romans knew that if he was still on the cross on the Passover, they'd have a riot on their hands. The Jews would riot because the Romans had desecrated their holiday. Because even though the Romans were amazingly cruel, they were not stupid. Okay.
Right.
And even though they were under the iron boot of the Romans, okay, the Romans were not going to deliberately offend the Jews to the point of insurrection.
Right.
You don't do that. Even when you're the occupying force, you don't incite your slaves, frankly, you don't incite them to riot.
Right.
You don't do that.
Yeah.
You can be really cruel, but you don't push them to riot. So that's one of the huge clues, is that the Romans knew that, because here you go, and I won't go here, we won't go there in detail, but there were 4 others crucified with him. Not
4?
2.
4.
4, yeah. 2 on each side, right? There were two thieves and 2 malefactors. Okay. So a malefactor is an evildoer, right? And so the reason we know it's 4 is because while a thief is an evildoer, not every evildoer is a thief.
Right.
And the Greek uses 2 different words, 2 and 2. 2 thieves, 2 malefactors. 4.
Oh. Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
So, but they crucified them. See, so the day before the Passover was known as the day of preparation. Okay. And that was the day the Passover lamb, right? The lamb, right, for the Passover was selected and slaughtered. Okay. So they would select the Passover lamb, they would kill it in the afternoon, and then they would roast it. And then at sundown, because remember, in Jewish reckoning, the day begins at sunset.
Right. Yeah.
Right. So when the sun sets, that's the official beginning of the Passover. Right. So the Romans were concerned because they got 4 guys on crosses, right? That they can't have them up there when the sun sets.
You mean 4? A total of 5, though. With
5. Yeah. I'm sorry. Yeah. You got me there. Total of 5. They got 5 guys on crosses that they've got to be dead by sundown. Because, see, it's the day of preparation.
Right.
It's the day before the official Passover, right? And they've got to have them not only dead, but off the crosses by sundown, or the Jews aren't going to riot. The Jews are going to go crazy, right?
That explains the afternoon.
Right. Well, also, Jesus is called the Lamb of God. That's not some random innocent animal. That's a very specific title. Any knowledgeable Jew would have recognized that that is a reference to the Passover lamb.
Ooh.
Not just any lamb, the Passover lamb.
Right.
Max, he died at the exact same time they were killing the lambs.
Wow.
Okay.
Wow, that got dark.
Yeah. See, because the whole point of this,
oh, man.
And this is true of many of the labels about Jesus throughout the Bible, right?
Yeah.
He's not called the Lamb of God by accident. It's not just some random innocent animal. He's not called the bread of life by accident. Okay. Because we call it the Passover, but what they're experiencing here is actually a 7-day feast known as the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And Passover it's a separate feast, but it's also a part of the 7-day feast of unleavened bread. It's simply the first day. And if you ask a Jew today, they use the 2 terms interchangeably. Okay. Really? So they'll call it the Feast of Passover, but what they really mean is they mean the full 7-day Feast of Unleavened Bread. Right. Or if they say unleavened bread, they're also referring to the first day, which is the Feast of Passover. Right. So he's the Lamb of God, and a knowledgeable Jew, an observant Jew would go, oh, that's clearly a reference to the Passover lamb. Right.
Yeah.
Well, he's also called the bread of life.
Wow.
No accident either.
Yeah.
Because to an observant Jew would think of the manna.
I'm sorry, what's the
The,
manna?
the manna in the wilderness, right? So when the Jews were wandering in the wilderness, God miraculously fed them by causing this substance known as manna to just spontaneously exist every morning, right?
Oh, okay.
And they would go out and they'd gather it up and they'd make bread out of it. Okay. So, and it was called manna, right? And we don't know much about it other than that, right?
Right.
But when Jesus said of himself, I am the bread of life that comes down from heaven,
It's a connection.
they would be going, oh, manna, right?
Yeah.
Also, during the Feast of Unleavened Bread, which is part of Passover, they would make bread without yeast. In other words, without leaven, right?
Yeah.
So it's flat bread. It's not puffy, right?
Mm-hmm.
So likewise, when he said, I am the bread of life, they would also connect it to the unleavened bread of Passover, because Passover is to a Jew, Passover is the fundamental feast, right?
Right. Yeah.
So if you're an observant Jew and you're living in anticipation of your Messiah, and then this guy shows up and goes, well, I'm the Lamb of God. Oh, Passover. Oh, I'm the bread of life. Oh, Passover.
Yeah.
Right. So and so you start ticking off these indicators, right?
Yeah.
And then there's one more, right? Which is that because this is part of how we get the timeline all messed up.
Mm-hmm.
It's a 7-day feast, right?
Mm-hmm.
The first day is the Feast of Passover, which is what is known as a high Sabbath. Okay.
Yeah.
In other words, it's a special holiday, a special Sabbath.
Mm-hmm.
But if there's a 7-day feast, a weekly Sabbath is going to fall in there somewhere.
Right. Right.
Okay. Right. So when the scripture is describing all of these circumstances and it says on the Sabbath, which Sabbath are they talking about?
Right.
Are they talking about the weekly Sabbath? Or are they talking about the special Sabbath? So you have to pay extra special attention in the crucifixion records. Okay.
What does it say?
Because that's the thing. It says, well, on the Sabbath this and on the Sabbath that, and they couldn't have them see, because this is why they think it's Good Friday, because they couldn't have them on the crosses on the Sabbath, because they're thinking weekly Sabbath, Saturday.
Right. Right.
But it wasn't the weekly Sabbath that was in mind. It was the high Sabbath, the first day of the Passover celebration.
Wow. And it starts on sunset. So
right, and which starts at sunset, right?
Right.
And then ironically, there's another high Sabbath within the Feast of Unleavened Bread. So you've got the high Sabbath on the first day of Passover.
Right.
And then there is there's a weekly Sabbath somewhere, right? Mm-hmm. So, and it's determined by the full moon, right? Mm-hmm. The Feast of Passover is always on the first full moon after the vernal equinox, right? Mm-hmm. So there's always a high Sabbath on the first day. It's a 7-day feast. There's always a weekly Sabbath. And then there is also another Sabbath in there, because there's another festival called the Feast of First Fruits that takes place during that festival as well. Okay.
Wow.
And I can't, frankly, because I don't have it memorized, take you through all of the gyrations of the Feast of First Fruits. But the Feast of First Fruits was related to the barley harvest, because the barley was the first crop to ripen in the spring. Right. Mm-hmm. And since the Jews made extra special effort to acknowledge God for his sustenance in their life, when the first crop was harvestable, they would harvest it, and then they would take the first part of the harvest, the first fruits, right? Mm-hmm. And they would offer it to the Lord. They would go to the temple and they'd wave it before the Lord. And that was called the Feast of First Fruits. Okay. Wow. So you have at least 2 high Sabbaths and 1 weekly Sabbath in here somewhere, right?
Right, right.
So that's why you've got to pay really super careful attention when reading the record, because it's really easy, frankly, to confuse a weekly Sabbath with a high Sabbath.
Yeah, yeah, that's where the whole literal
Yeah,
reading or
and
translation comes
that's
from.
where, and as you and I have said several times today, it's not that their conclusions were illogical. It's just that they didn't follow it through far enough to really hammer it out, right?
Yeah.
Because, like we said, the women arrived the first day of the week before sunrise to anoint his body. But it doesn't say he got up on the first day. It just says by then the tomb was already empty.
Right,
But
exactly.
that doesn't mean it's totally illogical to conclude that he got up on Sunday. That's not totally illogical. That's not unreasonable, but you need more information, right?
Right.
Then likewise, it says they couldn't have the criminals on the crosses on the Sabbath. Well, if you assume that's the weekly Sabbath, which is Saturday,
Mm-hmm.
then you make the day they died Friday, and now you have Good Friday to Easter Sunday. And you conveniently ignore the fact that it clearly said 3 days and 3 nights, and you can't make that work.
No, no. Yeah,
Right?
that's
See,
yeah.
but so again, the tradition takes over, and you honor the tradition instead of the truth, and you get this big giant mess, right? So the bottom line, right?
God.
Okay. But
Wow.
see, like I told you a moment ago, Max, he died at the same time they were slaughtering the Passover lambs.
Wow.
That was a great, big, huge, giant, glaring clue to anybody who had eyes to see and ears to hear to go, this is the Messiah, guys.
Yeah.
God's making it really plain.
Yeah. Crystal clear.
Really, really, really plain.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, I'm going to quote from a scripture that was written many years after his death and resurrection.
Mm-hmm.
But the Apostle Paul writes in Corinthians that Jesus Christ is the first fruits from the dead.
So that means he rose on the first fruits Sabbath.
Yep.
Okay.
Which was, guess what? Exactly 72 hours later.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. So to everybody celebrating Easter this Sunday,
Yep.
get your facts straight.
Get your facts right. To all of you celebrating Resurrection Saturday,
oh God,
that's it, dude. It's
That's
Saturday.
it's
And
so
see, and it would have been a
mind-blowing.
high Sabbath, and it would have been the weekly Sabbath, both.
Yeah, exactly.
Right? And that actually makes complete sense for the Messiah to get up from the dead on the Sabbath.
Yeah, exactly.
It makes complete sense. So once again, all of a sudden, when you take the traditional story and go, oh, good grief, please get rid of this traditional gobbledygook and tell the real story. The real story is better. I mean,
yeah.
I would halfway understand if the tradition was like really cool and that the truth was like really boring. I would get, let's do the tradition then, you know. But the truth is so much more exciting.
Yeah, I mean, just based off of Mary and how she went, the whole recon thing and stuff. Like, us as individuals, we like suspense. Number one, we like thrillers. We like, figuring, like, detective stuff. And
Mm-hmm.
if you really think about it, the story that's been regurgitated for the past, I don't know how long, centuries, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not appealing. I'm sorry, I'm being honest here. It's not appealing. It's very very plain, and it just doesn't, like what you've told me today. It makes a very good movie. It makes a very good story.
Right.
And I actually care. That's why I asked him, like, dude, imagine the stress they're going through. Right? So, and that's where the questions come up, instead of kind of like glorifying, or not glorify, that's the right word, but kind of like showing a PG version of the birth,
Right.
I think that's probably a good way to call it. It's a PG version where people can understand the gist of it, but when you start breaking it down, what's the significance of the animals? What's
Right.
the significance of
Mhm.
all this stuff? Why is he wrapped?
Right.
If breaking it down, you're right. The original story is
Well,
way
well,
way much
well.
better.
Think about it, Max, because I mean, you're taking my ideas from it, but that's okay because it's all good. But because I want to make movies about these things.
Mhm.
But think about it. Think about what I described earlier. Imagine this in a movie now, right?
Yeah.
Mary and Joseph in the wedding chamber.
Say what
You,
again?
you want to talk about an amazing scene, right?
Yeah.
Because it's celebration, it's the nuptials, there's a party going on outside, they're supposed to be consummating the marriage, they're two young kids in love, and let's be blunt, Joseph is horny as hell, right?
Yeah. Of course.
And they get into the wedding chamber and they're about to, and like I said, and Mary goes, there's something you got to know. Oh
That's
my
like
God.
it's everyone's worst nightmare.
And to put that on the screen,
Yeah.
right? You want to talk about real life,
Yeah.
and you want to talk about honoring God with, a depiction of reality, or, go, talk about the crucifixion, right?
Mhm, mhm,
Do the and now see, and now that I've painted the picture of the crucifixion for you,
mhm.
so now we start talking about the personal application and the theology. Because, see, the whole point of his crucifixion was that it was vicarious, it was a substitution. It was a substitution for you or me,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And when you start thinking about the torture that he had to go through to redeem you and me, now that starts playing with your head and your heart. And then we can go there if you want, but another teaching I do, another lecture I do, is that, see, here we've talked about all this symbolism, right? See, the
Yeah.
Bible is a code book, if you didn't know,
Yeah.
right?
I did.
um, because not only does it now a lot of the stuff it teaches us is in plain direct language. Make no mistake, right?
Yeah.
So when it says Jesus wept, it means Jesus wept, right?
Right. Right.
Um, or when it says, Mary gave birth, Mary gave birth. It's using plain language. But the Bible is a Jewish book,
Mm-hmm.
and the Jews believe that every verse has at least 4 layers of interpretation.
I believe
And
that.
yeah, and one of those layers is symbolism, right? And it's one of my favorite things to do is to um, study the symbolism throughout the Bible, because you can take something as mundane as a shoe, right?
Mm-hmm.
And start with the first mention of a shoe all the way back in whichever book mentions a shoe first, and then look at all the uses of the word shoe throughout the Bible, and you'll have this amazing insight into why a shoe is used as a symbol, right?
Yeah.
Or a color, why the color purple, or why certain vegetation,
Mm-hmm.
right? Why the vineyard, why the fig tree, why the olive tree, right?
Yeah.
They all have very significant meaning, right? So symbols throughout the Bible are just amazing. Okay. Well, and okay, let's go there. Let's have fun. Okay, because like we joked about earlier, and I'm not picking on you. You admit that your biblical knowledge isn't super extensive, right?
No. No. I'm not even gonna
But
pretend.
you're not even going to pretend, right?
No.
So if you
I'm
think
not.
about the crucifixion,
Okay.
how many different ways and from where on his body did Jesus bleed?
Oh. That's actually something I was gonna bring up on how I remember when I was young, they would comment about how he was nailed through the hands, right?
Right.
So then on the crosses, I don't know if you should know this. They started adding the rope,
Right.
right? So they started adding little details here.
Mhm.
But one thing that always stood out is that he was bleeding. The most graphic statue I've ever seen was at what's it called? One of the missions. My God, it's time for another mission.
Mhm.
There was this statue there that I'll never forget this. That his whole face was just covered in blood.
Mhm.
He had scratch or cut marks everywhere. He had
Mhm.
the wound here. He was bleeding from his hands, and he had just marks all over his body.
Right.
That was the most graphic statue I've ever seen.
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, but Scripture actually mentions specifically
Uh-huh.
7 different ways that Jesus bled. Okay. So he clearly would have bled from his hands or his wrist because there was a spike through them.
Right.
So, number 1, hands, right?
Right.
There's also a spike through his feet.
It's 2. Well,
Right. Well, yeah, just feet.
Okay.
Right.
Okay.
I'm not counting 2 hands, 2 feet.
That just want to clarify.
2 from his feet.
Okay,
His side, you already mentioned his side, so let's get that one there. See, and real quick, quick rabbit trail back to what we were talking about earlier.
Mm-hmm.
The spear was used as the final stroke when necessary. See,
Mm-hmm.
so if they needed the accused to be dead, then
Mm-hmm.
that would be the final thing they would do. Is they would and you got to remember that a Roman spear point is like 12 to 14 inches, right?
Yeah.
So they would go up through the side into the heart. Okay.
Whoa, I didn't know that.
Yeah, and so that's how we know that because back the fact that the Romans wanted to accelerate the death of the criminals to get them down off the crosses before the feast began. It says that first they broke their legs, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because that would accelerate the process. But it says when they got to Jesus to break his legs, he was already dead, right?
Yeah.
So then they pierced him with the spear just to make sure. Okay. So that's how we know for sure he was already dead.
All right.
Okay. So you got the hands, you got the feet, you got the side, the back. We know that.
Mm-hmm.
That's 4. We know about the crown of thorns. They put a crown of thorn on his head. So that's 5. So there's 2 more. Okay. Now I'm really picking on you because you don't even have a super lot of biblical knowledge. But even in crowds that know the Bible,
mm-hmm.
what are the last 2? And it takes them forever to figure it out.
Hold on, let me take a stab at this.
Okay.
Okay, so we have the hands, which is 1, the feet
Mm-hmm.
2, spear 3, the back is 4, crown is 5.
I've actually already mentioned one of them. If you picked up on it.
Oh.
If you follow it through to its conclusion.
Well, I was gonna say because of the lack of breathing, he was probably bleeding out of his mouth or his eyes,
Right.
from
But these are things
suffocation.
that are actually mentioned
Oh.
in Scripture, right?
I didn't catch
Or
that.
or at least inferred, because one of the 2 that I'm about to mention is we are not told explicitly that it was this type of bleeding. We just know from what is mentioned that he bled in a certain way.
I go for it.
Well, they put a bag over his head and they beat him, so he bruised.
Oh. Okay.
In internal bleeding.
I was gonna say internal, but then something told me not to because we wanted something that was I thought you wanted something visible. That's why I said that.
Well, but it's true. He would have bled internally from the beating.
I should have gone with my gut.
You should have gone with your gut, man. You would have had it.
I would have had that.
And then
that
the
one at
final
least.
one, it actually happened the night before. It says that when he was in the Garden of Gethsemane, where he was arrested,
Mm-hmm.
okay, that he prayed so fervently that he burst capillaries in his temple.
What?
And bled. He sweat blood. And that's a legitimate medical condition. Under extraordinary anxiety, you can burst capillaries in your temple and bleed and sweat blood.
Wow.
Right. But the reason I bring all of this up is because I've taken a turn, okay, from the historical component of this to the theological and personal component of this. Because, it is that season, and this is the centerpiece of the Christian faith, is that he died for you and for me so that our relationship with God that was wrecked by Adam and Eve could be restored, right?
Yeah.
And it's called the redemption or salvation. If you look at each of the 7 ways Jesus bled symbolically, they infer 7 different types of sins.
I see it.
Yeah. So
Wow.
it's so once again, it takes on a personal level, right? It takes on a personal component that, see, he bled from his hands for all the evil works we have done with our hands.
Yeah.
Right. He bled from his feet for all the evil ways we have walked in. Right. From his back, scripture literally says, by his stripes. Okay, the beating on this, the whip, by his stripes we are healed.
Yeah.
So that's for our healing, right? From his side, now this is conjecture, but because I know scripture works this way, I believe this is true. In Genesis, it says that God created Adam first, and then he created Eve second. And it says that, how did he create Eve?
From the rib?
From the rib. It says he opened up his side.
Yeah.
I don't think that's a coincidence. I would bet money it's the exact same location.
I can see that. I totally can see that. Yeah.
So I believe that Jesus bled from his side for our relationships.
Wow.
Okay.
Wow.
And then you got the crown of thorns, right? For any way we didn't make Jesus king. Idolatry, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
That if he's not Lord and Savior and King in your life, but my favorite is the bruising. Okay, because there is this odd little thing in the Bible that is known as iniquity. Okay. And iniquity, and it's a rather involved explanation, but it's worth explaining. Iniquity is a propensity towards a certain kind of sin. Okay. So what I mean by that is, if you look at the Old Testament records, if a person committed a sin that was worthy of death, right, that merited the death penalty, which is primarily murder, sexual sins, and certain forms of idolatry, right?
Yeah.
But they commit a sin that merited the death penalty. It says that God would commute the death penalty, but then impute what is called iniquity to that person's descendants. In other words, he would spread out the punishment for a certain number of generations.
Which is the whole bad luck.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
But it makes sense when you start to think about it, right? Because if you have a man who commits a murder, right?
Right.
He's got anger issues. Okay.
And yeah.
But if God is going to be merciful, because that's what iniquity is iniquity is a form of mercy, right?
Right.
He commutes the death penalty, because not only will the man not die, but if he has future children, they get to exist. Right?
Right.
So it says God visits the iniquity on our children and our children's children to the 3rd and the 4th generation. Right?
Wow. Yeah.
So if I'm a murderer and God commutes the death sentence, my children get to live, but they are born under a, for lack of a better word, curse.
Right.
Okay. They're born under a curse that they are going to have anger issues, just like dad did. And they are going to run the risk of becoming a murderer. Right. Which is why it's incumbent upon me as a good father to tell my children, hey, I got anger problems. You guys need to watch out for anger problems.
Right.
You don't want to be like your old man. I killed a guy, you know, right? Okay. Yeah. So it's this very interesting thing called iniquity, right? that is a form of curse that is visited. That's the biblical word, that is visited upon multiple generations, right? But that means that we are born with a propensity towards certain kinds of sins, right?
Mm-hmm.
So this is where we see, because we know this from the mental health field, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
That certain things run in patterns.
Yeah.
Addictions,
Right.
divorce,
Anger issues.
anger, all kind of aberrant behavior runs in patterns through families.
Right.
Well, that's interesting because the Bible says that's what it is. It's this thing called iniquity, right? Okay.
Wow.
But iniquity, here you go, because now I'm tying it together. Iniquity is an internal sin.
Hence the bruising.
It's the bruising. Because it says very explicitly in the book of Isaiah that he was bruised for our iniquities. It literally uses that exact phrase.
That is so symbolic.
Isn't it?
Yeah. Wow.
And think about it, because iniquity is an internal sin. Bruising is an internal bleeding.
Right.
And also, it said, check this out. So they put a bag over his head and beat him and said, "Oh, prophesy who hit you." Right?
Right.
Iniquity is the sin that you don't know where it came from.
For those of you guys listening, I hope your mind is blown.
You better be.
Wow. Okay, so what about the sweating?
Right. Well, he sweat blood for due to ridiculous anxiety. So he paid for our anxiety.
Wow.
Okay. Every mental, emotional, anxious sin you've ever committed, he paid for with the blood he sweat in the Garden of Gethsemane. And check it out, because the reason he was under anxiety was because he knew he was about to get arrested and was going to his death.
Right.
That's a little bit of anxiety, my friend.
Just a little bit.
Yeah. And he even prayed. He prayed to the Father and said, "If there is a plan B, can we go with that?"
Wow.
Nevertheless, not my will, but thine be done. So he knew what was coming. He knew his death was coming and that it was going to suck. Okay.
Yeah.
So here he is praying to God and saying, "Man, if there is any other way, let this cup pass from me. If there is any other way, can we please do that?" And he is praying in agony and sweating blood, because I'd be, good Lord, if I hadn't passed out.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Tim, you're a beautiful man. This was fun. We got to do another one and just dive deeper. This is like my mind is so blown right now.
Well,
you left me in awe last time.
What we definitely need to do at some point, because we never got to go there with the first God Save the King nativity thing, is we need to do the astronomy.
Yes, that's what I wanted to go into, but I know that's
another time. We'll do that.
Yeah. No, because Easter, or Esther is coming, and I mean it was perfect timing. It like the stars lined up. But yeah, man, dude, thanks for doing this. This is amazing. You blow my mind every time, and we got to do, because I'm gonna tell you, I'm gonna end it at this. I'm huge in space. My favorite theory is black holes, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
right.
I'm always looking in the stars. I'm always looking in the skies. Mm-hmm. I follow astrology. I'm not very knowledgeable in like the terms and history and stuff, right. But ever since you showed me how the stars lined up, we'll leave it at that. For you guys that don't know what we're talking about, watch the previous episode. How that lines up, I'm now paying more attention to stuff like that.
Well, we can do two things. So we can do the astronomy as it relates to the nativity, because that's huge, right? Yes. And although it's not related to the nativity or the resurrection, if you want to at some time, we can discuss the relationship between quantum physics and the shape of the letters in the book of Genesis.
Yes. Yeah, you had me at quantum physics. Let's do
Right.
both.
Well, because modern quantum physicists believe that the universe exists in 10 dimensions.
Okay.
Okay. Well, there's a couple of Hebrew sages that determined that back in the 11th century from the shape of the letters in the book of Genesis.
To be continued, my friends.
Precisely.
All right, don't forget to visit GodSaveTheKing.org, right?
Correct. Yep.
Okay, just want to make sure that was correct. .org. Follow Tim, man. Like a lot of, even if whatever it is, religion you're in, it's really good stuff. I'm like every time I'm in awe. So yeah, GodSaveTheKing.org. Subscribe, like, all that fun stuff. And if you guys have questions, leave a comment, and then we'll answer it. Or if you can, email Tim if you have any questions for Tim.
There's a contact form on God Save the King. So yeah, leave a comment in the questions. I'll try to respond, and or email me through God Save the King.
Awesome. Amazing. We'll schedule another one. We'll talk to the producer. All right. See you guys next week.
All right. Thanks, Max.